some of them today. We're going to be meeting again on Monday. We've got a couple of members that's got to be at a DOT meeting at 4 o'clock. So we're going to call up House Bill 889, Representative Gravely. First up. Is there anyone out there I need to recognize? Most important person in here? Marcia. Would you stand up where everybody could see Chairman Jasper's beautiful wife, Marcia? Happy Valentine, dear. And then I see an old crusty guy over here with post counsel in the back. Good to see you, Ken. Colonel, good to see you. I think we got an amendment about putting booting over in the public safety coming up shortly. We didn't even get a smile. Didn't hardly get a laugh out of him on that one. Mr. Gravely?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. If I may amend my earlier statements, Representative Collins does not have to be at this particular one, although I do. God bless you. Thank you. Members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, I bring to you today House Bill 889. This is a bill that simply brings parity for public safety personnel in line with the Federal Indemnification Act. And some of you may say, well, what is that? Let me give you a scenario. Currently in Georgia law, if a firefighter shows up on a scene to fight a fire and has a heart attack or a stroke while fighting that fire, or within a 24-hour time period of fighting that fire, and they die, they would be eligible for an indemnification by the state of Georgia. If that firefighter and police officer or any other public safety personnel shows up to a flood situation and they both work together in tandem to save, whether it be citizens, children, from that flood, get them back to either the creek bank, the roadside, and both of them sit there and die of a heart attack or stroke due to the strenuous activity that they were engaged in, neither would be eligible for indemnification. That is different from the federal eligibility qualification. All we're asking for is that this be applied to public safety personnel in these types of situations if they are on scene or within 24 hours of having been involved in a scene such as a fire or a flood, that they would be eligible to submit an application. By virtue of being on scene, that is not a prerequisite for approval. There is a robust application process. There is a robust investigation process that would have to determine the cause of the heart attack or the stroke was directly related to fighting the fire, to being on scene of a flood, to having trained. There was a situation where firefighter, City of Marietta, 3 years ago, firefighter Lonnie Nutt had been training at the fire station, going through the physical training requirements. The bell rings. Lonnie goes, gets on the fire, comes back to the station, and drops dead of a heart attack. That is a situation where it was covered federally and was qualified federally, but correct me if I'm wrong, was not qualified at the state level.
Correct. It was a car accident.
It was a car accident. Went to a car accident. So the situation here is we are simply asking that our public safety personnel be qualified or be at least able to apply in situations where heart attack or stroke, due to the nature of their job performance, at least have the ability to apply at the state level for the indemnification. And I will stand for what appears to probably be several questions.
All right. Number 26, who would that be down there? Ms. Fraser.
Oh, yes, ma'am, Representative. I apologize. It would, yeah, well, it would be for death and disability. Yes, ma'am.
Let's see. Mr. Pitcher.
Thank you, Representative Gravely. So, first of all, so you're specifically here focused on heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular type events.
Absolutely.
Is that because otherwise everything else is covered already?
That is my understanding. Yes, sir.
This is a gap you see, if you will.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so you mentioned robust investigation. Help me to understand exactly what that is and what that looks like.
Absolutely. If I may, to Representative's point, refer to the Catoosa County Public Safety Director, who has had experience with this.
Good afternoon.
And this is Dennis Thayer.
I'm the chairman of the Georgia Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and I've in the state of Georgia since 2006. I've done every application for line of duty benefits in the state from the fire service and EMS, with the exception of one, both federally and state applications. The application process is quite rigorous. It takes about 6 months to complete an application. You have to stipulate what happened, document that, and prove what happened. You have to stipulate and prove that the applicant is an eligible applicant, hence a firefighter, police officer, EMS type person, whatever the case may be. And then you have to stipulate and prove eligible dependents. And when an application gets done, it's a binder that's about a half-inch thick or larger.
Thank you, sir. And so this process, you do a lot of these. Obviously.
Yes, sir. I've done.
How prevalent is this? If you were to look at the aggregate force of firefighters, in other words, statewide, how often are you dealing with issues like this?
In about the last 4 or 5 years, there were 2 cases where firefighters, if this law were changed, would have been covered, that they were not. I cannot speak to law enforcement because nobody looks at that at this point in time.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's due to the ineligibility, and I'm not aware of any law enforcement officers out there that would have fallen under this law if it had been changed. It doesn't exist, but I'm not aware of any off the top of my head.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Is that it? Mr. Clark. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. Is this affected by workers' compensation laws? Or is this in addition to?
It's in addition to.
Okay. And are there any requirements for pre-existing conditions? And do you require a routine physical? I get it. When you go through being hired, you have to be physically fit, and yet they have annual reviews. But I'm looking for somebody that will have a heart condition that you don't know about. And I have seen actually a firefighter that had a heart attack trying to open a water main. And they actually had one on the spot. And it was over strenuous work. So I just, I'm looking for pre-existing, and are we doing anything to keep this from happening to somebody that already has a condition?
When you become a firefighter, when you're hired, in order to be state certified, you do have to go through a medical examination, and that varies depending whether you're volunteer or paid. The state law does not currently require firefighters or any public safety personnel to have a physical every year. We're getting better at that. We're working on that. What we typically, in the federal case, in the federal application process, if the firefighters had a heart attack and they've had prior medical history, what we look at, what the federal government, Department of Justice looks at, number one, are they doing what the doctor says they can do? Because if they've been released by a doctor to do it, then they should be okay. If they've got a doctor that says you shouldn't be out doing this scenario completely. And number two, if are they on medicines and are they compliant with those? So while if somebody's got some sort of pre-existing history, doesn't completely knock them out of the eligibility, there's some encumbrance on them to be sure that they're one, eligible to do it from their doctor, it's safe, deemed safe, and two, that they're compliant with their medical
Yeah.
regime.
Is that something that perhaps should be looked at? I'm thinking particularly of heart conditions because this person had the widowmaker and no one knew it. It was completely hidden. And had he known it, it might have prevented that. He did die.
Representative, I would strongly support a measure that would require fire departments to give very in-depth physicals for every firefighter every year. However,
ACG here and
no,
GMA.
the dollar amount I think is prohibitive of that, especially when you start looking at volunteers. It's extremely expensive. I know the department that I work for now that we've been trying to do that, and we're a department that has money funding, and it's taken us 3 years to just try to make it the logistics of it work.
Okay. If there's one other question, Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
does this apply to volunteers and? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. That would not paid.
No
paid
distinction.
and volunteers, it would be the same.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, speak to the lady's point, I think we would be very open to either some type of annual physical to ensure that we're not awarding some type of indemnification for something that was not caused due to the performance of the duty or whatever hazardous situation that the public safety personnel were to have shown up to on the scene. If it was completely unrelated, if it was something that was could have been either prevented or at least through a physical fitness checkup, something like that we would be open to that type of situation to where we could maintain and specifically focus on the incidences that were related to the job performance or the duty of the job.
Is that it? Ms. Frazier.
Yes, sir. Are we, as it relates to the public safety officer, I do not see the DNR included in this. Is there a reason why they are not? They are public safety officers also.
They are public safety officers,
Yeah.
sworn officers.
Yeah,
Would they be-
if you can answer.
Yes.
Would they be up
Ma'am, I
under
think they would
state,
be considered under law enforcement.
under the law
Yes,
enforcement?
ma'am.
Okay, just making
that-
sure.
That would require post-certification,
Correct.
which would identify them in the code as law enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Petrie.
Yes, sir. One more question. I'm very familiar with work comp, hire a lot of people, and very familiar with that process, but obviously not this one. Help educate the committee here on how the Georgia State Indemnification Fund is funded. Help us to understand how that is funded.
I believe it. I mean, it's funded through the state budget annually.
Is it just general revenues?
yes,
Is
sir, I
are there
believe
any
so.
other? Is there
No.
any local piece? Is it
No,
all
sir.
state money?
It's all
Is
state
All
money.
be state.
It's
all state money
Yes,
coming
sir.
straight out of
Appropriated,
public safety with Andy Welch
which I will be
right through there?
at a public safety hearing for public safety appropriations at 4.
So there's no funds coming from seized items, or I'm just trying to understand comprehensively where those funds come from. All taxpayer dollars.
Yes, sir. I
All
believe
taxpayer
it's
dollars.
a line item in the state budget.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I'm to the gentleman's point, I don't know if it can come or if it would even be eligible to come out of any type of forfeited
Yeah,
asset.
That's
funds
why
or
I was
anything like
curious.
that.
I mean, I knew obviously they
But
were
I can get that
primarily taxpayer. I didn't know if there were other routes as well, and having not been familiar with it.
Absolutely, I can get that information.
One last question. Do you have any data on, obviously, these individuals also qualify for workers' compensation, and you're familiar with in workers' compensation, you have a certain percentage actuarially of people that malinger and abuse it. That data there's copious amounts of data on that. Have you guys looked at the results you have compared to work comp providers nationally and statewide and otherwise with your in similar code categories where they're accomplishing this similar task? Have you looked at that?
It depends on what I find, and this is my personal experience working throughout the state for the last 11 years. It depends on the department, the municipality or county, their willingness to file the workman's comp benefit. Workman's comp often does pay in a heart attack case, regardless of what, if it was a strenuous, if they were on a call, and you can show that. Workman's comp does very often pay. A lot of times we end up in the appeals process. I've seen them where they've started to pay, then back off, we appeal and we settle. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes it's the municipality or the governing agency refuses to file it while the family has that ability. They oftentimes they can't take on that financial burden to file it, and they choose not to. I think in most of these cases, what we've seen in the state of Georgia is most of them, a good many of them are eligible for the workman's comp benefit, and I'd say probably at least 50% pay out, the ones that are filed.
Thank you.
Good question.
All right. I've got a question. How many claims have been filed annually on average?
On the average, since I've been doing this since 2006, it's 2 to 3 a year. Now, that encompasses everything. That's just not heart attacks. That's may have died in a fire or traffic accident, and that's on the fire side.
Very good. Any further questions from any of the committee? Is anyone here today wishes to be heard on this issue? Gosh, y'all are a pretty good crowd to get along with today. If not, what's the wishes of the committee? We have a motion to pass. Do we have a second? We have a second. Any further discussion? Any last questions? Any other subsequent motions? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Rakestraw. That's about 9:13. This should not last more than 2 minutes, should it? This is the amended version of the bill that you presented Monday.
Yes.
And the committee substitute, if I can find it.
LC 411415S. So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, this is the study committee that I spoke about the other day on pre-arrest diversion. This is just the joint study committee. So, the bill's been updated to include the Senate in this process, and there will be 3 members from the House of Representatives, 3 members from the Senate, appointed by the Speaker and the President of the Senate, and limited to 5 days, and there will be co-chairs chosen out of those 3 by the Speaker and the President of the Senate. So those are the only changes made.
Any questions from any of the committee members? Y'all may remember this bill from Monday. We just, it was suggested that we go to a joint. We have a motion to pass. Do we have a second? Second. We have a second. Any further questions? Any commentary from anybody? Anybody wishes to be heard again? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Nay. Ayes have it. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I think that was under 2 minutes.
If you'd have been here before we started, you'd been first, and you'd been quicker than that. All right. Let's see. House Bill 817.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have House Bill 817. It's LC 411416S. I had this bill on Monday as well. Several of the members had questions, so we had a meeting with Julius and some other people and members to kind of work through and make sure that what we are working on adequately addressed the concerns. We also added in another bill that's out there which is HB 804, and that's the first part in Section 1. That is currently under Georgia law, in regards to window tinting, private investigators, private security, they have an exemption. The exemption is currently operated in the course of business. Well, a lot of people in this line of business, it's their personal vehicles, and so they're getting ticketed a lot when they're coming to and from work, and you know, they're not acting because of the nature of their work. There's a lot of questions of what is actually in the line of business, or in the course of business. So this just simply says a vehicle owned or operated by somebody who's licensed in this code, in that code section. So that's that part. And then the other part in Section 2 is dealing with, again, under Georgia Code, private investigators and private security. They are licensed under the Secretary of State with a board that oversees them in Title 43, Chapter 38. And this, since they're licensed there, that kind of governs. They have the ability to carry firearms under that license. It permits them to carry firearms, and it lays out it's a lot tighter restrictions on that than it is the license that the general public can get through the probate court. So they have to have annual training, maintain certification. They have to have, before they can even get the license, they have to go through class and have so many hours of class and be taught on the use of force and all this kind of stuff. So under current code, they have exemptions. And what we're trying to do here is clarify, because all the changes we've made to code section 1611, in particular 126 and 127, the changes we've made and added different paragraphs and stuff, we wanted to make sure that they maintained the current, the scope of exemptions that they had under previous code before we started making all these changes. And that's really what this bill is about. In fact, we're even tightening it up a little bit. We realized when we added the lines on line 28, where it says, while such individual who is licensed under the Secretary of State, while such individual is in the performance of his or her duties as provided for under this chapter. Previously, it didn't matter. They had the exemptions even if they just had the license. It didn't matter if they were in the performance of their job duties. So, and we went through, there were some concerns about courthouses and things, and so that's why we added some of that language in this section as well. So I know there were a lot of questions. We tried to answer them and clean up the way the bill was, and a lot of it was just cleaning up the way the bill was written. If Julius can correct me on that too, is adding some things in that section down in lines 34 through 38, and then like from 30 through 38. That most of that was already in code. We were just, the way we had written it made it kind of confusing on the previous version.
All right. If I might ask a question, Julie, as you worked this up with Chairman Clark, did we put this back where it's clear now that in the process of their job and their licensure, that they can carry the weapon where they were able to carry it, but not into like gun safe zones, courthouses, places like that?
Right, and the way the law is now, they could carry anywhere, even if they are working or not. So what this draft does is to say that it has to be while they are performing some kind of private detective work.
All right.
And then we added in 1611.1, which does allow them to carry in school safety zones. But again, that's only while they're in some kind of performance of their responsibilities with the school board or with the school.
Good
So
deal.
if they were hired to run run security for an event at the school, they would be able to,
All right.
or a public event and things of that nature.
Any questions from any of the committee members? You must have done an excellent job of this. You've just knocked the air right out of the committee members. Ms. Frazier? That's what I thought.
My question is actually for Julius. The conflict we had a couple of days ago was about the code 16-11-130. That really how all of this began, and we were trying to make sure that code, that they were not violating specific areas in that code. And so I don't see it on here. That means that they are not now in conflict.
Right, and really 16-11-130 is completely separate. That code section does not apply to private detectives. Their exemptions are under this current code section. I think last time that conversation started, out of a concern that private detectives had a broader grant of carry authority than even those under 16-11-130. But what this version does here is to bring them more in line with those same restrictions. But again, it's completely separate world, because 16-11-130 is under for those who are not private detectives. This is for those who are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions from any of the committee members? If not, is there anyone that wishes to be heard on this matter? God, I'm faint. All right. What's the will of the committee? We have a motion to pass as a committee substitute. We have a second. All right, any further discussion, any further motions? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Nay, and ayes have it. Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good job. Colonel Hitchens is not here. Ms. Lott?
Would you like me to start?
Are you going to handle, you're going to handle 703?
I can. You're ready. Not as well as he
No, I'm sorry, that's. I'm sorry, I thought I saw your name beside one of them, but you're second signer on both of them?
Did you have 913 on the list?
I've got 703 and 867.
Okay, no, I'm just second signer on 703.
Is that the one you're going to handle today?
Yes, sir.
703. All right.
Colonel Hitchens is the other one. Yeah, okay. Then I'll do this one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. HB 703 is a bill that we passed out of this committee a week ago. It is the bill that was granting or opening up a new agency, basically the Governor's Office of Public Safety Support. And on that day, we had officers and firefighters lined up to speak, and I know many of you heard those stories. And we had a unanimous vote out of committee to go to pass out of committee, but in the rules room we hit a little bump in the road. There were some it was too broad for some, and so what we've done here is there is a new LC number, and it is LC 411430S. And I'm hoping that y'all have that LC in front of you. And some things that have changed on this bill, some things that we did, is that line 107 of this bill, where it labels the public safety officers, we have cut out Department of Transportation and Georgia National Guard, and there was an additional line in there as well that in the past said basically other public entity employees that acted in a first responder role. We removed those three. So now what we have done with HB 703 is made this public safety officers are the emergency management rescue specialists and the EMTs, the firefighters, law enforcement, and prison guards. And when it does say law enforcement, it also says or other employees. That does include dispatch.
firefighters or other employees of the firefighter team as well. We made that correction, and then we made a couple minor changes. We did define critical incident support services because there were some questions. They had not sat in committee, and Chairman Hitchens does a better job than I do of telling this story. So I hope most of you remember his speech rather than mine. I'll just get through the bill. We defined critical incident support services to make sure that people understood that this is not long-term therapy for anyone. This is really basically when help is needed in an urgent matter. Either there is an immediate, maybe officer-involved shooting, or the cumulative effect of some of these, this lifetime in service, sometimes brings upon, oh, here we go, yay. but may also have an urgent need, where someone all of a sudden is turning to alcohol or considering suicide. And it may not have been an event that just happened this week, but something that they just no longer have the ability to deal with. And so we defined the critical incident support services to make sure that you knew that we are not there hoping to start something with long-term therapy. Really just that initial response. The peer support teams that we discussed last time are still in existence. And that is the primary focus. We get the peers there, and then they can help to either encourage or assess any needs that may be available beyond that, that are already available in those agencies, like mental health counseling and chaplain services and those sorts of things. Chairman Hitchens has arrived, and for your sake, I just went through the changes in the...
Okay, and I don't have much to say. I think we went through it all the other day. I think one of the problems we've had is I may not have explained it very well in rules. And everybody thinks that this is a long-term mental or emotional health plan, and that's not the case. It's pretty much in and out. Critical incidents, the research on psychological problems, particularly in the public safety arena, shows that if you get to somebody within 24 or 48 hours and somebody that's properly trained to deal with it, they debrief them, establish what the facts are that actually occurred, and then try and diffuse it and get a little bit involved in the emotional part of it. You stop a lot of emotional or mental trauma down the road, and that's the basis of it. That and a couple of conferences every year where they bring people together and people that have experienced it to get to talk, much like they do in a lot of other venues. But this is, you know, been doing it in the Department of Public Safety now since 2005, and one of the reasons, I think Colonel McDonough said it the other day, we went over to a meeting in South Carolina, and they had a clinical psychologist over there that was running their program. And I'd seen a couple of, we had a couple suicides in our agency, and some people that had turned to drink and had marital problems. And we spent in DPS, we spent a lot of money on them before. It probably cost $100,000 to get one trained. They have 7 months of training in residence. You provide them with all their equipment. It's a heck of a washout rate, about 50%. And then they get involved in a critical incident. And it happens all the time. I've told people, Colonel McDonough and I were talking the other day, you know, I've been in a couple of shootouts in a running gun battle for about 25 miles. I had a shotgun stuck in my face one time. I was chased around the car by a guy with a switchblade, and I was about 30 feet from the bomb in Centennial Park when it went off.
And that's just since you've been a legislator.
Well, I said on Lawmakers the other night, everybody still thinks I'm normal, except my wife. But, you know, it does take and I'm an old Marine Vietnam veteran, and I've seen a lot of people that suffer from PTSD, and it affects people differently. But if you can spend a little bit of money and hit it at the onset and save people, it's economically for the government, it's proper, and certainly we save people from a lot of wear and tear on themselves and their families. And I've just been, we implemented it. I think, I don't know whether Colonel McDonough has spoken today, but I think it's been very successful through the years. It's the first, we're the first state in the country that has been certified as for doing this, and had the first conference. I'll tell you how accepted it is at the local level. Local police agencies last year raised $180,000 by bake sales and raffling guns and doing things to have the conferences so that they could bring the people in and try and assist these folks. So And I'd be glad to take any questions. I hate to walk in the
You
middle.
have
I've
a
been
few
Ways and
questions.
Means.
Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the removal of some of the groups that they had a problem, like when you were saying it was too broad, one of those was like the Department of Transportation. And I remember from Monday, you said that that's actually some of the largest group that has some of these critical events because of their work on the interstates and highways, and they see bad things.
They have a lot loss of life too. I was on the
Right.
State Indemnification Commission for 12 years, and I was shocked at the number of DOT employees that came through there. If you get killed in the line of duty, there's an indemnification paid to your survivors. And it's not uncommon. You look at their equipment now, they've all got, if they're working alongside the road, they have 2 or 3 trucks behind them. They've got that bumper on it so that if a car does run through it, that it's able to slow it down some. But there are a lot of people that aren't paying attention, and they run through the cones or whatever, and somebody gets run over.
Right. Another issue. That's in another committee. Just kidding. But the question I have is, if they're removed from this peer support, does that mean that they can't get the training, but they could still receive the peer support, or how would that work?
Well, that's probably going to be up to whoever runs it, but this has not been codified before until about 2010, and the way we were able to do it is that in the Department of Public Safety, the personnel that we utilized are in place. Their salaries are paid. One of the main things that the State Patrol does, it patrols the streets and highways, so they have fuel and cars, and they pretty much done this on their own. The problem has been in holding these conferences. They're usually about $25,000 to $30,000 a piece, and as I just said, they've gone out and they've
Right.
raised the money themselves. I just think, I said on Lawmakers the other night, when we pay for everybody else in our society that needs this kind of treatment, mental health treatment, the deputy sheriffs in this state spend half of their time hauling people back and forth to the mental health facilities. It looks like we could spend some money to pay for those who are out there trying to protect us.
Yes, sir. I guess my comment on that would be, and I do have another question, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman. My comment on that would be, I guess in order to get it through the process, we make this change and get the help that we can get, and then if it becomes a problem, we can come back again and address that. And we might need to do that, but we got to get it through the finish line. So
There's a lot of support for this, and I probably should, when I presented it, when you go into rules, I was trying to be quick, and I think one person said to me afterwards that we're going to take care of them from birth to death. And that's certainly not the case. This is short term. The captain that's in charge of this is a licensed clinical psychologist. I was on the phone the other day from the veterans' perspective. There was I got a call from the hospital in Augusta where the shooting had occurred there, and the lady was shot. While I was on the phone, I was made aware that the shooting was going on at Locust Grove, and that a state trooper here in Atlanta had shot one. So, this is it's a pretty chronic problem anymore. But Captain Carrier, who runs the program in DPS, was already en route to Locust Grove to deal with the problems down there with the officers and their families, and from a leadership perspective, law enforcement officers can be very concerned sometimes about asking for mental health.
right.
I mean, but if somebody in the system like Captain Carrier says after he's evaluated him and tried to diffuse him that this guy needs some further professional help, that's available. We've had that there, but this is kind of a big boys league, and everybody doesn't want to come forward and say, I'm having emotional problems and I need to go see somebody to get straightened out. Everybody's a tough guy, and they don't want to admit it. Plus they worry about their career. If you have mental health or emotional issues, do you think they're going to look on that favorably as to promote you or retain you in the organization if they think you be? And if it gets bad enough, are they ready to explode? Do you want somebody to stop you alongside the road that's just had it up to here, and you may say something that sets them off?
Right.
I mean,
And I don't know if I'm speaking out of order here. I don't know who made that comment, but the irony is law enforcement, they're taking care of us from cradle to grave. So I definitely support this issue. I think it's good for public safety. I think it's good for those that are serving us in this capacity. I do have one question, though. I have noticed since Monday, that this is a new agency, versus, why didn't we try to put it underneath another agency and instead creating a new agency?
And, you know, I've been around a long time, and I've been asked that question a lot. And, you know, the Department of Public Safety, as it was conceived and as it came to be through the years, was the State Patrol, the GBI, the Crime Lab, Post Council, Public Safety Training Center, Office of Highway Safety. Everything was within it. And in some of those areas, like Post Council and the Public Safety Training Center, there was so much local involvement that there was a push to take it out of the Department of Public Safety and had it be independent, so that a state agency wasn't running something that the local people were involved in. And that was the thought process here. You know, it would still be administratively attached to the Department of Public Safety. The Public Safety Training Center and Post Council and the Fire Academy still are attached to the Department of Public Safety. They pay all their bills, they do their human resource work, they provide their legal people, so that they don't have that overhead, and you know, they provide the service otherwise.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Mr. Workheiser.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the bill. I do have a question. Line 12, just out of curiosity, why are we using the term prison guards? Because the Department of Corrections is pretty adamant, as you know, about using the term correctional officer, and I did look in code, and that phrase is used, and then we go on to then define prison guard. Any thoughts, or has somebody brought that up?
Did you say line? I'm sorry. You said
Line 112, and then right below that, it starts to define prison guard. They really don't like that term.
And we don't have any problem with that. I think Legislative Council just put that in there as he was writing.
Okay.
And that's probably old law.
Right.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Is there anyone here that wishes to be heard on this issue? It must be Valentine's Day. All right, what's the motion? What's the motion? Motion. All right, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion.
Just a quick, do we want to make the amendment for correctional, the correctional officer instead of prison guard?
I see that as positive.
Or we could, if it's easier, we can handle it as it moves through the process through the Senate or whatever. But I'm just saying they are very.
Oh, I understand.
About that.
I've dealt with them a lot. And,
We could pass it as a committee substitute, correct? And Julius can work on the language after we pass it, right? Or do we have to vote on that language right
If he
now?
works on any language, he'll be working it on for another committee. He won't be working on public safety.
I would say let's go ahead and pass it, and then we can, as you go through the Senate process, about that. Well, I mean, you're gonna open it up anyway. Well, Chairman, what do you think? You're around those folks a lot.
You know, this can be perfected. I'd prefer it not leave this committee unperfected. That's,
But the problem is, I mean, if I gave the amendment, the correctional, and I did look it up in code, that the term is used under the juvenile justice area. So, I mean, if we just did an amendment, change line 112 to correctional officers, and then we could eliminate lines 113 to 122.
Would we need to define?
You know, what the amendment would be is to, on lines 112 and 113, to change prison guards to correctional
There you go, and then you leave the definition in there. I'd like to make that motion, Chairman.
all right, one more time. Now, you're 24?
I'm
Your
24.
motion is to,
I'd like to move that line 112 be, prison guards be stricken and replaced with correctional officers. And then on line 113, prison guard be stricken and correctional officer be used instead.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Does everybody understand the motion? Yes. You're only changing the description from prison guards to correctional officers in 2 locations there. All right. Anyone else? Anyone else wants to add anything? All right, and you're putting that in the form of a motion? We have a second to that motion. Well, first off, let me see, did I make a motion on the bill itself? I haven't done that yet, have
No.
we? Then, all right, we have a motion on the bill. Now, we have a motion and a second on the amendment. Any further discussion on the amendment? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment has passed. Now, back to the main question. And this would be a committee substitute. And then I think probably best just do a whole new committee substitute. And is there any further motions? Any further motions by any of the committee members? If not, all in favor of the original motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the ayes have it. Colonel, you want to just sit right there and do your other little bill?
I think so.
I think you can get through this other one a little bit quicker, can't you?
I'm hoping I can. I hate to admit it, but I ran off this morning. My wife's not here with me, and she didn't inspect me when I walked out the door, and I didn't bring my glasses, so. Well, I got the guy here who knows all about it anyway, but it's, Did you change it?
I believe that's, is that not Howard Seal's best friend with you there?
I thought it was his cousin. Thank you. I was kind of hoping for the pink ones with the diamond stud, but
Isn't that the sweetest lady you've ever seen?
yeah, we're on camera too.
Hello, Mr. Vance. Mighty good to see you. I expected to. If not, you'll have to come back Monday.
Well,
All right.
I'm good to go now. This House Bill 867 LC 411371. And this is kind of a maintenance bill for the Peace Officer Standards and Training Council. Director Vance is here that has run it now for years. I was a member of it for about 12 years and certainly understand most of how it operates. The first change here is in section 1, lines 17, 18, 19, and 20. And what it does is it makes it gender neutral. The officers in post council, instead of chairman, vice chairman, chairperson, vice chair, they make it the chairperson, vice chairperson, secretary, treasurer, and it changes the quorum from 7 to 11 because there were some additional members added to it by legislation.
Yes, sir.
The second one is probably the one that is most significant on lines, section 2, lines 48, 49, and 50, paragraph D. Investigators provided for in the subsection C of this code section may retain their weapon and badge upon retirement pursuant to the requirements and procedures provided for in the code section 35-120. Everybody else in state law enforcement now gets to keep the gun if they retire honorably after the minimum number of years. This would just do it for post council. How many investigators you got now?
10.
Got 10 investigators. They investigate police officers, so they've got a pretty tough job. And the last portion of it is section 4. It's on page 3, lines 80 with the whole section. And for many years, the Peace Officer Standards and Training County have certified chaplains. And that's a difficult process. People believe in different things, and We think it's best left up to the local agency if they want to have a police chaplain, decide who he's going to be and let them handle it themselves rather than post taking up the time and effort to try and train them and send them to school. So that just strikes police chaplains out.
All right.
What's that?
70 and 71, where we're taking out that retest time.
Mr. Vance?
Oh, I'm
would you
sorry.
Mr. Vance, would you like to discuss this handout you gave us?
Yes, sir, I
I
would.
mean, other than killing a few more pine trees, was this just something that you wanted us to have knowledge of?
No, sir, I kind of wanted to add that red line down there.
All right.
Okay,
Go ahead.
okay. On line 70 and 71, currently, if you take the entrance exam to go into a law enforcement academy and you do not pass that exam, you have to wait 30 days. That's, in our opinion, a little too restrictive. Some people have never taken a test like that before, and once they see it, they kind of see how it's going to flow. Then they can go back very shortly and take that test again and pass it. And y'all have taken SATs and entrance exams and stuff like that. You know how it is for somebody that hadn't taken one in a while. So we're doing away with that time frame, that 30-day time frame. If they want to go back the next day or that afternoon, yes, they're going to have to pay to take the test again, but that's on them. That's on them. So we'd just like to have that delete the waiting time to retake the entrance exam, just taken out of the law. And then what I handed out to y'all was another redundancy that we found in the law. If you have a 4-year degree, you still got to go take an entrance exam based on a 12th grade education and pay for it. So what we are asking here is that individuals with post-secondary degrees from an accredited college or school will be deemed to have met the requirements of the entrance exam and not have to do that. College education ought to be worth something.
If I might ask a question on that, does that mean a 2-year associate degree, or
Yes,
does that
sir.
mean a 4-year BS degree?
2 years.
2-year
We'll go
degree.
2 and 4. Yes, sir.
If I might further that, we're after accredited college or school. I think we could scratch the school so we don't confuse the issue.
All right, sir.
Julius, you're the wordsmith. Would that be correct, would you think?
Yeah, I was actually, perfecting that. Should I read it out now?
Yeah, if you might, put your wordsmithing skill to it, because Ken's my friend, but I know that him and the sheriff over in Putnam County probably had to join together to write this.
Good. Yeah, I did.
The sentence would read, and will read, any individual with a degree from a post-secondary institution accredited by a regional accrediting agency recognized by the United States Department of Education shall be deemed to have met the requirements of this paragraph.
That sounds very professional. Thank you, Julius. All right. And you'd like that to be added at the end of line 75?
Yes, sir.
Julius, again, is that the proper place? Add that language at the end of line 75, new sentence.
Yes, after, periods after.
All right. All right. Any of the committee members have any further questions? All right, Mr. Clark.
Yes, sir. Just due to some ignorance on this, I have a couple of questions about the amendment. Should it be related to, like, the degree be related to this field, like specific fields, or you just want 4-year degree in general?
Just a degree, sir. Just a degree, because what that shows is that person's taking that extra step. I have a degree in English, and I know it's hard to believe, listen, but I have a degree in English and a master's degree in creative writing. But I think that extra work, regardless of the degree, puts a person in a better light as far as doing law enforcement work.
Okay, and then
If you narrow it down, sir, to just criminal justice, then what about somebody with a psychology degree that wants to be a law enforcement officer? They got to go take the test.
okay, and then should we specify, Julius? This is more for you to make sure that it is a a 4-year, like a bachelor's or greater degree, and not an associate's? You're fine with an associate's?
I'm fine with associates. They still have to take an SAT or ACT to get an associate's degree. They've already done the testing on the front end, and to get into either a 2-year or 4-year school.
It's not a skills test, is it? It's just a general knowledge.
It's a general knowledge test, yes, sir.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any other questions from any of the other committee members? Ms. Frazier? Yes, ma'am.
Maybe this question is for Julius also. The requirements on line number 8, the individual with post-secondary degree with credit college or school should be deemed to have met the requirements of the paragraph. Now, up in 35-8-8, the very first paragraph, does that have anything to do with this is just for entrance exams, the requirements for appointment or certification of a person have a high school diploma or its recognized equivalent?
GED.
That's just to what?
That's to take the entrance exam. If we add this new language, that would be to take the entrance exam if you don't have a 2 or 4 year or better degree.
So that's actually gonna be added up here?
No, ma'am.
No?
What's already there is the way, that's gonna stay that way. Those people that take that entrance exam, they've either have to have a GED or a high school diploma. And that's the vast majority of people that apply to work in law enforcement. They're either high school or GED, diploma or GED. With this, we're adding that language that we just talked about would be added for those that have a 2-year or 4-year or better degree. The basis is still gonna stay the same, ma'am.
Yeah, and they'll just be exempt from having to take
Correct.
that exam. So
Correct.
it doesn't need to be stated up here. This
No, ma'am.
needs to be the same, just an average high school
Right, right.
diploma.
Right, but they've
But-
gotta have that to start with, yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other questions from any of the committee members? Do we have anyone in attendance that wishes to be heard on this matter? Oh, gosh. What a good crowd today. All right, what's the will of the committee? We have a motion to pass the original bill. Subsequent motions.
Make a motion to make the amendment that we. Make a motion to add the amendment that we discussed regarding the, and that was presented as Julius
At
had.
the end of line 75.
Yes, sir.
After the period, then the language that Julius had put forth. Does anybody want to hear that, the language again? No? All right. All right, we have a motion to amend the committee substitute into a new committee substitute. Is that correct? Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend the bill as a committee substitute. All right, any further discussion? Any other motions? No other motions? If not, on the motion to amend, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Now to the main question. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the ayes have it. Colonel, you're done.
I've been told that before.
Stick a fork in you, brother.
Yeah,
Thank y'all very much.
I think I've had that done
Mr.
too.
Mr. Ken, it's mighty nice to have you with us today.
Yes, sir, honored to be here.
You don't have to come back to this committee,
Thank you.
or at least,
come back just to see
at
you.
least not on this issue.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Question for you before you leave.
Yes,
Cliff Packard is working posting.
no, fine fellow.
I ain't seen Cliff in a long time. He's from my area.
All right, last but not least, we have a committee substitute on House Bill 774. We heard this bill Monday. I don't know that if we've got time to go through it or not, but thanks to the subcommittee and thanks to Representative Collins, there's been an awful lot of work that's gone into this. And he'll present it, and if it looks like we need to do any more work, we'll come back Monday to handle this, but if not, we'll move forward with it. Mr. Collins?
Okay. You should receive substitute LC 411418S. Several members of the committee met to try to iron out a few things about the proposed legislation that we had some issues with. Julius worked hard on this, and so thank him for that. If you'll just go through the bill, starting on line 23. It talks about the definitions of the vehicle immobilization device. One of the things that we changed in this bill previously is the local permit. We were kind of stuck on where to put the local registrant, and initially we had talked about sending it to the Secretary of State's office, and that didn't work out. Going to Department of Public Safety, that didn't work out either. So it was at the request of Chairman Powell that we looked at local government to be the one to register this, and also it kind of runs true that we want to give local control to some of these issues, as we've heard from testimony that these are some real issues that are facing our constituents throughout the state. We felt like local government would be a good place to allow them to regulate that. It talks about you can't have a felony if you scoot down to line 43 through 45. It talks about if you have a felony, you can't be booting cars in Georgia. On 46 through 50, it talks about the names. One of the things that we heard about in some of the testimony was these names are confusing to those who are booted, and so with the interest of transparency and accountability, we want to make sure that those names of these companies are out there for people to be able to call and get their car out of the boot. If you go on down to lines 56 through 64, it deals with the gratuities. You can't have ownership in property and make money off of booting as well. So there's a fine line there that we have defined. If you come on down, you have operator IDs and uniforms. If you're going to put a boot on someone's car in the state of Georgia, you got to have an ID. You got to be identifiable. You have to wear a uniform, so it just can't be some kind of fly-by-the-night person in a pair of coveralls or somebody with a T-shirt. So come on down on line 75 through 80, it talks about vehicle description. You have to have a magnet or some type of signage on your vehicle if you're going to boot cars and go through parking lots and do that, so the general public can easily identify those who are going to be doing that. It also talks about in lines 81 through 88, it talks about the requirements for 24-hour service. If you get a boot in a parking lot at 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, call the number. They have to have someone who answers the phone and is able to talk with that person who's had the boot put on their car. 88 through 90 is also an important issue there as well. If a car is booted in the state of Georgia, we're going to make them put a sticker on the car that notifies them that their car has been booted. So, if it's on the passenger side of a car for some reason, the driver's side has to be notified that that's on there, so they won't damage their vehicle. Flip on over on page 4. You have some requirements where the lines 99 through 103, it talks about the time frame. We're making sure that these booters are responsive to those who have been booted, so you don't have an extended wait period of time there. It talks about some things with receipts. Also in lines 104 through 108, where the booting occurs there. Damage and liability to the vehicles in line 109 through line 114. It talks about not liable for some damage if the owner is moving that vehicle, and also it talks about not holding the person liable for the boot as well. Down on lines 119 through 125, it talks about the fees associated with this. We heard in committee testimony, just hitting on the high parts there, that there were some, some exorbitant fees, astronomical fees that were imposed. This caps that at $85. It also caps the additional day fee if you don't remove that boot soon, that the fee that can be charged on that. Let's see. If motor vehicle is impounded for non-payment or a parking fee or failure to properly display any parking fee upon production of a receipt or proof that you did pay, you're not charged for that booting fee as well. If you come on down in lines 136 through 163 on page 5, it will discuss the signage. One of the things that's vitally important, ladies and gentlemen, I think in this piece of legislation, is it talks about the signage and has to be clear. One of the things we heard in testimony was that some of these lots where you have towing, the sign may be posted in the back corner, very far corner of a lot, and you would have to go seek out that sign to be able to look at that sign, and you'd have to, hunt for it. This legislation requires that it be placed, as you drive into the parking lot, and make it readily available to those who are patrons of that parking lot, and it's very specific there as well. Also specific language about the businesses that are being regulated through the booting process, so the shops and stores that you're going into. It makes that very clear. And then back on page 6 of the proposed legislation, it deals with the local ordinance and some penalties and permits if your permit's revoked by the issuing agency, there's a penalty there. They can pull your permit. It talks about local ordinances, and then also it talks about the fees associated with becoming a provider of or being able to offer this service down on lines 182 through 207. I know that is a lot to digest in a short period of time, but we have heard this bill several times, and there are just some things that have been changed.
I'll tell you something, I'm pretty proud of you. You done a pretty good job on this. I don't see anything. The colonel's back there waving. He's just so proud he doesn't see anything in there about registering with DPS.
And I thank the colonel for looking at it that way with us, and we appreciate your willingness to help us out there.
It's Valentine's Day. Thank you, sweetheart.
If I might back up to one spot.
I would like to say one more thing about, I know that I've heard some rumblings over to my left about the fee, but that we did look at that. Representative Petrie was in that meeting as well, and if you look at what the industry standard has been, and you look at comparable to tow service, so the local municipality, again, in this legislation, they can lower that as well. I mean, so if you've got a city of Atlanta that's charging, $85 for a parking boot, just to give you an example, and then say little old Whitesburg, Georgia wants to do that, obviously you wouldn't want to have Whitesburg charging the same thing. If they want to charge less, they could charge less. They could charge $10 or $15 or whatever it may be. So this gives local government flexibility based on your geographic location in the state. Things may be a little less to operate.
You'd be talking about the $85 cap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cities don't have to charge that much. If they want to charge less, it's their right to regulate that to a lesser fee.
All right. If I might ask a question, and if you go to line 32, I want to be sure this is, like I said, it's a lot to digest with this rewrite. The chair initially, in my thoughts about this, is that they would register with the local government of where they're domiciled.
Right.
JLS, do we need to be specific that now looking on line 32 where it says regulatory permit issued by the local government whose jurisdiction such office operates. Do we need to make a reference to, for clarity, that it would be where they are domiciled, where that booting company is domiciled?
Right, because as it is written now, they will have to register in each, local jurisdiction that they're doing business in.
Which is not the intent. We don't want someone to have to go around. We did away with that years ago with some other business that the state had done. But the idea is that they would register there with the local government wherever they're domiciled, and then they would they would have a copy of that business license if they're doing business in another jurisdiction. I beg your pardon? All right, that's just a thought of that. Whose light was on first? All right, Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just was looking, are there any exceptions for like public vehicles or law enforcement or first responders, handicap, anything like that? I couldn't find one.
What kind of exemptions would you be talking
That
about?
you can't, that you couldn't boot a handicapped vehicle or a police officer's vehicle if they were parked somewhere. I wouldn't think they would.
Police officers' vehicles parked in the wrong spot, they can certainly be booted.
Okay, all right.
You may remember, you may or may not know that this past Monday, Deputy Director of the GBI's vehicle was booted, GBI car was booted across the street because he forgot to put his parking ticket on the dash and left it on the console.
Okay.
All right.
I would argue though, Mr. Chairman, that if that car had been fixed with a state of Georgia State Patrol.
Probably wouldn't have been wise if it
Probably
booted.
wouldn't have been booted. I would
Probably not.
That'd be my.
A marked vehicle probably would not be booted.
And on that issue, this fixes that too, that if you can show receipt, now that doesn't exist, like, so that guy had the receipt, he still had to pay to get the boot off.
All right.
Well, now we'll fix that.
All right. Ms. Frazier?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I just don't like the booting bill. It just makes me unhappy. And so, with that being said, I see a lot of provisions in here for me as the bootee, but I don't see any provisions in here for the booter who's actually booting me. It's just saying that it shall be unlawful. It shall be unlawful for them to not have anyone at their designated location for 24 hours. And if they are, and if I try to call and nobody answers, there's nothing here that say, well, if they're not there, this is their penalty. If they don't have anybody there for 24 hours. It's not anything here in any of these sections. It's just saying it shall be unlawful. But for me, I have strict penalties in here. If I do this, this, and this is what's going to happen to me. But I don't see any safeguards in here for me from the booter. I don't like this bill.
The way I read this, ma'am, Julius, you sort of bear with me, tell me if I'm correct in what I'm saying, but the being found guilty of a misdemeanor of a high and aggravated nature is that if the company or the booter, if they do not adhere to the word of the law, then they're guilty of a misdemeanor. And that seems to be a pretty good jump, and I know that your booty ain't happy with the current bill, but there ain't nothing in the law right now that stops them from doing what they're doing.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
your choice of words.
You used the word booty.
No, that's not what I said. I didn't say it in that context. So what provisions are in here for the person that?
There's misdemeanor of a high and aggravated nature if you have violated this section. Is that correct, Julius?
Yeah, that's in lines 165 through 168, where it says that if an operator does anything that violates any provision of the chapter or commits an unlawful act, that the offense would be a misdemeanor of a high and aggravated.
And what it, Mr. Chairman, I ask another question. What is the misdemeanor, what is the fine, or are they fined, or what? What's,
Well, a judge could sentence them to up to a year in jail, or a fine up to $5,000 or both,
okay,
or a combination of that.
okay. All right, thank you.
All right, we got lights everywhere. Mr. Petrie.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to my friend, Representative Frazier, I like Representative Frazier was real concerned about this the other day and wanted to make sure we did something that really was going to put teeth in this. What I was going to just mention is, as we met and worked on this, you know, right now it's basically the Wild West. I mean, there's nothing. And so you do have now a misdemeanor. We've got fees where they have to be, they have to pay a fee, and a biannual fee, right, to be in business.
That's right.
We've got a cap on what they can charge. We actually, and I was going to mention this, Representative Clark and I and a large group were coming back from supper last night, and there was a car booted right there on the street, and on that sticker there was a fee of what, 500 and some odd? There was a $500 and some odd fee on that sticker. We were looking at it because obviously it was timely. And so right now, I'm like you, I don't think it's perfect either. But when you look at, we're going from the Wild West, and we tried to rein in some of these issues that Representative Holcomb has dealt with and others of us have dealt with. It seems like we've really at least started down the road and going a long way to trying to get rid of the, you know, the ugly. There's always the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're trying to rein in the ugly, and I think this is at least a good start to doing that. But I certainly am sympathetic to your issue.
Well, I will ask this again, and I think this offer was made both to committee meeting and the subcommittee. Have you got any ideas that you'd like to put in to make this stronger? Because generally, if I put out a bill, I like for it to be as perfected as possible. I think what I'd said the other day, Mr. Holcomb wasn't at the subcommittee meeting, but I think I'd asked someone to get in touch with him to see if we could get some language on that situation that I thought was unique, that you brought up about this shopping center over in DeKalb where they had nailed you.
It's in there.
We tied that up, I think.
But, you know, what I'd like to do is if you've got some other ideas that would tighten this bill up more and make this more of a, quite frankly, this is more about this is actually more about a bill to protect the consumer. Because the consumer, which is anybody in here, that you stand the possibility of being booted. And I have a concern that if you're booted, and from what I hear from the various behaviors, that I've thought about it myself, and that once you've been booted, it doesn't make any difference whether it's a $50 charge or a $500 charge. Once you've paid the booters, you have no recourse of ever getting your money back if it was a wrongful boot. So the great thing is we're making these folks have to use credit cards. So I certainly advise anybody gets booted, if they think that they were in the wrong, to put it on a credit card and then stop payment on the credit card. And then go through a civil process if that's what these folks wish to do. Any questions? Let's see. Mr. Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Frazier did give me a copy of the bill earlier today, and I'm still working through it. One substantive question is on the issue of the stickers, recognizing that it makes sense to put it on the driver's side in the event that the boot is on the passenger side, because that way whoever's driving the vehicle will be aware of it. If they don't do it, then what would happen? Because under this, on lines 112 through 114, this says that you're responsible if you attempt to move. But if the sticker's not there and you're not on notice, then it wouldn't seem to be fair to make the driver responsible, or is that covered?
If the sticker is not on there, they're in violation of this law. Period. I mean, so then you've got some recourse there that the person being booted can fall back.
Okay. I'm not sure that's right in terms of how a court would interpret it. I don't know, Julius, if you have a thought on that, if you know the point that I'm making. I agree that they're unlawful. I'm not sure that if I'm a defense lawyer, I'm going to point to 112 to 114 and just say no. You know, that if somebody attempts to operate it, then too bad on them. Right?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Could we put on both driver's side and passenger side?
Or it's less that and more the indemnification side. If they fail to have the sticker and you move, then the operator is liable for any damage, not the driver. Does that make sense?
And did you get your question answered?
He follows me.
I guess that's more of a, it depends, I mean, that's a valid point. It just depends, that's a policy question if you want to go.
Got it. Okay.
You know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think one of the things we were talking about with Representative Petrie was as far as the, you know, not holding the operator of the booting company liable for damage. It's like what Representative Petrie said. I want to paraphrase this here, but you know, emotions are high and people are frustrated, and you get in the car and I'm gonna drive off, and so I mean this is a different type of business than anything else that we really deal with. I mean, it's just different. I mean, there's just, we talked about in subcommittee. You correct me if I'm wrong there. Right, and we had language before that actually held the owner of the vehicle responsible, that was in this language the other day, for damage to the provider. We'll use that term, to the provider's equipment. And which we removed, right? Which is now out, and that was I felt like that was inappropriate, and I think we've moved that out of there. This still would hold. This still would indemnify the contractor for damage to a vehicle if somebody and I still, you know, feel the way I do. I mean, yeah, people are angry, they're frustrated, they're in a hurry, they're being halted from whatever, you know, they're trying to get home or they're trying to make a meeting. And yeah, they're going to be angry and frustrated. There's going to be times they get in that car and move, and there's going to be damage to that vehicle. I still have concerns about that as well. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I know there was some people here that represent the coalition of booters, if you will, and they may want to add a few things here that I may have overlooked.
All right. Let me go through the committee here, and Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Collin, I'm glad that you explained on line 158 about the fee being capped. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to charge 85, but it's capped at 85. But also it says unpaid parking fees may also be collected if applicable. How do they know if I have unpaid parking fees?
That would be like the city of Atlanta, so you mind if I help address that one?
Sure.
If you would like to amplify on that answer.
So that's exactly what happened on the boot last night that we saw that Representative Petrie was talking about, was that that one was by the municipality, and they had $400 and something of unpaid parking fees, so that's why they got booted. And then they added on a booting fee on top of the fees that they already weren't able to pay. But so I guess like you have.
Well, if I have an argument and say I don't owe you no fees.
Well, that would be the city of Atlanta, like, you know, or the municipality or whoever that has written you a parking fee. I guess they're walking down and they see license plate numbers, and they, or like we had the bill yesterday with Representative Peasole, they're walking. I mean, that cop car is driving down the road scanning license plates with a camera, and ding! I mean, it pops up and says this license plate owes some parking fees. Cop pulls over and writes.
So there's a cop available when these companies come to boot you.
Well, this would have been the cop that would have done it. The city of Atlanta would have done it.
If you park illegally in a parking lot, okay, and you don't pay the parking fee, whichever is $10, $15, whatever it may be, you're gonna get booted, and you're gonna be charged whatever fee was it $55, whatever the municipality sets it at, or the county government sets it at.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you're gonna have to wind up paying what you should have paid to begin with for parking in that lot. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, you're gonna be booted.
I mean, unpaid parking fees, like
Right.
I have parking
Because if you
tickets.
got booted, you didn't have your ticket, and you didn't pay for a ticket, or you didn't compensate that lot for parking your car there.
But I can't move if I'm booted. I can't have an unpaid parking ticket
Yes, you
if I'm
can.
booted.
He's talking. Well,
How so?
he's talking about.
If you are on that lot, and you walk off, and you go shop, you go whatever you're doing, you hadn't paid that lot for parking there. They're gonna charge you a fee to remove that boot. Plus, you're gonna have to pay what you should have paid to begin with.
At the machine, I understand that. But I'm,
We're talking on the street.
right,
Right.
you said it was $400. How do you?
So, like the city of Atlanta, they have their own public, like the public parking along the street where you got to pay the little meters. Sometimes those are owned by the city as well. And so in this case, this was the actual city of Atlanta had unpaid parking fees, so they added a boot to that car to try to collect those fees as well. So this was in public parking, not private parking.
Private.
Right.
No.
These are private companies.
Part two is that, if applicable, that's for if you park in like a shopping center where there is no, where you don't have to pay to park. So if applicable was added to say that, you know, there it may be that you park there but no parking fees are assessed. So that's like if applicable was added.
So if we're talking about
That clear?
only private property booting, then actually we could scrap the unpaid parking fees.
Well, no, because
No, you would.
some private lots, I do require you to pay to park there. But some
All right,
private lots, like at a shopping center, you just park
all right.
there. and shop.
That was the example the context I was giving.
All right. Mr. Holcomb, have you got any suggestions to make this a better bill?
Not at this minute, sir, but I know you want to move it, so I'm not sure how you want to handle that.
All right. Ms. Frazier?
Mr. Chairman, did we cover the part in here about private, booting on private property? I mean, on, in my driveway? Is that covered in, we talked about that?
Yes, we did.
We addressed that.
And what did we finalize it to say?
Where it's at?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Peach.
What we did, we discussed that in the meeting the other day, and what we made sure, the language expressly says that you must have, with a private owner like that, you must have a contract with that. You must have a contract, and they must have a contract to do this on private property, and so that would exclude an individual in their own driveway by definition. And the only way they could do that is we discussed homeowners associations, but you would have to have a homeowners association that actually indeed had a contract to do this in that association in order for that to be valid. And
Exactly.
we couldn't comprehend that one would do such.
That's line 95 through
That's
98.
right, exactly.
Mr. Clark,
Line
you,
95?
Yes.
I can't find it right now as I'm just scanning through, but what line numbers relate to the notice that has to be put on the driver's side?
That's gonna be on, eighty-eight through 91.
So my question would be for Julius to address Representative Holcomb's concern is could we somehow, I mean, it would be all the legalese to get it there, but the paragraph D, so at the end of line 40 or 114, after the period, we could do like unless properly notified according to the code section paragraph D, and that way that you're, so you are putting that the notification has to be properly placed in order for, if that driver attempts to move the vehicle and they were not properly notified, that the driver of the vehicle is no longer,
Mr. Chairman,
that the company would be liable for the damages at that
if I
point.
may make one comment, one of the things that I've been, it's been good to see is that, these companies want you to notice these things. I mean, they paint them bright orange and yellow and green, and they want you to know it's on there. They don't want you to drive off and damage their boot. They want you to know that. So, I mean, I think that's the whole point, is they've made the effort, and and just kind of common sense tells you that they want you to know that boot's on there. And that's why they paint them these bright colors. I mean, they stick out. I mean, you noticed it. It wasn't your car, and you noticed it.
No, we noticed it. It was.
Yeah. I mean, so
Very
it's not,
nice.
it's not like they're hiding in the bushes to keep you from seeing that there's booted. They're hiding in the bushes to catch you, but they're not hiding in the bushes to keep you from seeing the boot on there.
But in this situation, it could have been that you walked out to your car, they booted the passenger wheel, and you walked out and you didn't go to the passenger side of your vehicle, so you didn't see it, and then now you're not properly notified by something being on the driver's side, and you go to drive off and your vehicle gets damaged. So that's the concern that Representative Holcomb was bringing up, that even though they are rainbow colors, you didn't see the rainbow, and that's why I'm just saying adding a simple little unless properly notified according to the code section paragraph D. I think that would put in the safeguards that Representative Holcomb was considering earlier as well. Would that be correct, Representative? And however it has to be worded out, yes. Y'all are lawyers, not me. I just write computer programming.
All right. Any other questions? Ms. Frazier, any other question?
No, sir.
All right. Ms. Jackson?
No, sir.
All right. Do we have anyone out here, anyone in attendance that wishes to be heard?
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Weatherington.
Are you the attorney?
I am.
2 minutes.
Done. I'll be very brief. I'm here on behalf of the thousands and thousands and thousands of consumers that this bill is designed to protect. We do not support this bill in its current form. And I'll be very quick. Number one, this will not remedy the problem of the quote-unquote bad apples in Georgia. They're charging hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Those individuals are already booting illegally. That's an enforcement issue, not a legislative issue. The majority of a booting occurs in cities that have ordinances. This waters down those ordinances, weakens the enforcement mechanisms, and makes it even easier for the booting companies to boot and prey upon innocent people who don't understand the rules of the parking lot. One glaring example, you literally cut the font size in half on these signs in this legislation from what Decatur and Atlanta and other communities have. You drop it from 3 inches to 1.5 inches. But Representative Frazier brought up a very important point, and that is that there is currently no private remedy in this bill for the individual who actually gets booted. Yes, the booting company could theoretically be fined if someone is so inclined to go chase them down through city administrations, but the individual who actually had to pay the route has no remedy here. The towing statute, however, does provide a remedy. Perhaps what you could do is substitute in under section lines 165 through 168 with the language from OCGA 44.1.13E, which is the penalty provision of the towing statute. So that would remedy that problem, provide a private remedy, and just fix that problem. Second thing is that this bill does enable booting companies to boot on behalf of HOAs and in private property. This isn't a theoretical thing that you can't imagine. This is actually happening. I'm going to read you a line from the front page of the Booting Company Alliance's website. Quote, some homeowners associations may be able to use our services to immobilize the vehicles of residents, even if they are legally parked, until any issue is able to be resolved with the HOA management. That's their website. They're doing it right now. I represent several people who were booted in their assigned parking spot at an apartment complex for enforcement of HOA fees. I represent several individuals who were booted at their home, a private residence, because of some dispute with a landlord. This enables them to do that. That's number two. Number three, this bill allows predatory surveillance practices by the booting companies. There's an easy way to fix this too. You just pull over the predatory practices section of the towing statute. That's subsection 44.1.13F. Just literally copy that language, put it into this bill. This will stop the predatory trolling of the parking lots. Finally, number four, the insurance requirements are insufficient to protect against the risks that are occurring. This only basically does property damage and things like that. So if you want to rein in the ugly parts of booting, don't try to regulate it. They're just going to take advantage of this. Ban it. That's the correct solution. I'll take any questions.
Did you make these suggestions at the subcommittee that you spoke hour and 15 minutes at?
Yes, sir, I did, and also provided a proposed substitute bill. I presume those items have been considered and rejected.
All right. Mr. Beecher.
Yes, sir. Who do you represent exactly, so I'll understand? I mean, I appreciate your comments, and you represent exactly who?
I'm seeking to represent every individual who has been booted by virtually every booting company in the state of Georgia.
Okay.
Our conclusion that for the last 5 years, every booting has been done illegally or in violation of local ordinances, and we have affidavits, facts, deposition testimony to back that up. I'm not allowed to talk to you about that.
Okay, are you? Do you represent individuals who, any individual in the state of Georgia who is suing a booting organization?
Yes.
Okay, got you. And some of those are in homeowners associations that have signed contracts to allow this to occur in those, because you're correct, this would still allow that. If an association chose to do that, this would still allow that.
Yes, I do.
Okay, got you. And that's who you represent. Okay. I'm just trying to make sure I understand where you're coming from. Okay. Thank you.
I'll give you a very specific example, by the way. A Marine came in to visit his mother who was a victim of stalking. He went to file a police report. When he came back after parking in his mother's parking spot, even though he didn't have the official decal, his vehicle was booted. He then went to the HOA association to basically fight the booting. In the interim, he continued to rack up fees all day, every day. The HOA rejected his claim to have his vehicle unbooted. And then he couldn't afford the booting fees. Eventually they came out, towed the vehicle. It was impounded, sold. He lost his vehicle while coming to visit his mom.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to suggest something. We've talked about this a great deal, and today and the other day, and we had a great meeting with. We had a great, I think, a very good operator. I know there's the good, the bad, and the ugly in everything I do, and everything everyone else here does. But there's a lot of I don't think we're ready to pass a bill like this. There is a lot of doubt that is obvious here today. I think everybody here wants to protect consumers. I do believe this would be an improvement. I take exception to one of the things. I think this has to be an improvement over what we have today. I can't imagine that what you have today, which is nothing, this can't be an improvement. But it sounds like we're going to be coming back to visit this again next year, and I don't know that makes a whole lot of sense.
Quick question. You were speaking about how we are trumping like local ability. At lines 169 through 174, I think would clarify that, where we say local government may revoke or suspend. Hold on, I'm at the wrong lines. 176. A county or municipal corporation may adopt an ordinance that is identical to the provisions of this chapter or that imposes additional requirements that exceed the minimum standards of this chapter. So my understanding with that language is if a county or city wishes to have even stricter guidelines and regulations on this, they can. Like, we're just setting a statewide standard, and cities can be even greater.
Sure, that's a fair interpretation. The issue is that there's also language in the bill that prohibits any kind of municipal ordinance that conflicts with the language. So what you're doing there is you're creating basically a situation where when it says do this, they're going to believe that if they try to make it more strict, for example, making it from 1.5 inches to the proper 3 inches, that would theoretically be a conflict with the existing legislation. And I understand that may not be the intent, but you're dealing with literally hundreds of counties and cities, and the way it reads and the way it's instructing to those municipalities would be that you have to do this and it can't conflict with it. What they would be allowed to do under the existing language of the bill would be to say something on the lines of, in addition to all of this, you must also put this language. But it would, in most instances, that would be me doing something that is completely different than what it says, as opposed to increasing, for example, the font size. And I understand the intent would be to not have that result, but that's how it's currently written.
That was my question.
Yeah, thank you.
Before Monday, tomorrow may be challenging, but before Monday. Yes.
Did you get some ideas this gentleman put out? Because this is in fact a consumer protection bill. Yes, sir. And I'll say the same thing that I said at the start of this discussion Monday. While booting might be distasteful to a lot of people, it is a fact of life. It's a business tool to stop people from parking in certain locations or wherever they're not supposed to. We want to be sure that this thing is as good as we get. There's nothing perfect. But, I said something about your situation. That rang a bell to me. Rings a bell to me that people don't have an option. It's one of the things that rings about putting credit card use in it. You can always put it on a credit card, and then if you have an objection, you can put back off some fees and go through the process. If y'all have anything, you want to take some of his ideas, if you don't mind. Representative Petrie, would you mind working with him?
I'm glad to.
Okay. Y'all can get some last minute, the little stuff I talked about earlier in the village. Now, the folks with the local governments, are y'all happy? Did we get that, language that y'all were concerned about to be sure that if a city or a county wishes to ban?
So Mr. Halliburton and Mr. Thrash were able to share the language a little bit ago with us, well, at least with me. And from what I saw and that look through the bill, it looks like you have that balance that you talked about. But obviously we'd like to, if you're going to keep working with the language, we'd like to keep the dialogue open if we need to. So, but I think you struck that balance where you have the local control and you set the state minimum standards. So that's my view.
Just wanted to say, take a minute or two. Mo and I do represent the booting coalition. As Mr. Petrie said, we are at the wild, wild west of booting right now. I'm not sure, when he said we are not happy, I'm not sure who he means by we, as in thousands. I'm not sure who he's talking about on we. But we've had over 4 hours of testimony, maybe 5, multiple meetings, endless compromise with almost every member of this committee. And we feel that this is about as good as we can get this bill, to where we're going to have standards across this state in all cities and counties, and all cities and counties can go tighter with their rules and lower on fees and make this tougher than this says. And we're not sure what else can be done possibly to make this tighter than it is now to where booters can still boot. And what's most important here is property owners who own this property, who paid for the property, and they charge people parking fees for them to collect the fees that are supposed to be charged. If you don't pay your fee, then you get booted. If you go to another parking lot, there's signs, there's language that's been put on the sign now. As Mr. Holcomb mentioned, that's a terrible thing that happened, and we've attempted to address it here. And as you said, if the receipt falls off your dash and it goes to the floor, now there's language saying if you show them your receipt, you get your money back. On and on and on and on and on. And it'll never, ever, ever be perfect. Everyone who's spoken here today has an agenda. I think Mr. Petrie asked some very good questions. What is our agenda today? And we support this bill. Our clients are not happy at all with a large portion of this bill. But that's all part of negotiating. And we feel it's negotiated far enough, and we're not sure how much more can be negotiated, but we are happy to keep trying, and we appreciate the opportunity to try to do so. Mr. Chairman, I believe you're correct on the intention from your end, I believe, and Mr. Collins' end, I believe. On line 32, I believe the intention was where the booting company is domiciled, not every single area they offer booting. So that would be, in my non-lawyer opinion, line 32, within whose jurisdiction such operator is domiciled, and then get into provided. Thank you very much.
I have just very brief two things to talk about. One, I'm just going to say that if we're going to go back and amend this and look at it, and if it's a consumer bill for consumers to protect them from booting, then towing's the floor. You've got a towing statute. It's gone through the legislature. It has appropriate protections in it. Anything that's a protection in the towing statute, it's got to be duplicated in the booting statute, because if not, I don't understand. Why is a booting company treated differently than a towing company? So if there's a private remedy in the towing statute, copy the towing statute's private remedy, add it to the booting statute. If there's no automatic surveillance under the towing statute, copy it. Copy it and put it into the booting statute. Otherwise, this is just welfare for booting companies. You're treating a situation where you're saying for some reason, booting companies are entitled to benefits that towing companies don't get. No idea why that would be the case. Two, I appreciate the fact that the committee has attempted to address the issue we talked about where you don't know what businesses are allowed and not allowed, but I would say that the language that you've got for that in the current bill isn't appropriate and still allows the same game. And I'm just going to use a simple example that everyone already knows. The lot across the street from Ponce City Market where there's a Whole Foods and a Home Depot, I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with that particular lot. That's one of the best lots to boot at in the entire city of Atlanta, and the reason is because there's a game happening there. The game is that it's not one shopping center, it's two. And you would never know that unless you're in this litigation or you got booted. And the shopping centers are, the Whole Foods is one shopping center and the Home Depot is another. And you'll never know. And this bill, the language on the sign that you're saying that you can put the shopping center and not include the business names, you need to include all of the business names that you're allowed to park at on every sign the same way that Decatur does. Otherwise, the same game keeps happening. People are parking at Whole Foods, they walk to the Home Depot, they find out that they got booted, they have no idea and don't understand why, because they're actually at two shopping centers because it's two plats and it's two properties. So you're letting this happen again. You can fix it. It's very simple. Look at the Decatur ordinance, copy the language, put on the sign every business that you're allowed to go to in that particular parking lot so there's no ambiguity. Lastly, I want to talk about the residential booting. Again, not hypothetical. We talk about people that we represent where this happens. I just want to talk about me. I live at 1280 West Condominium. I live in a homeowners association where people boot for not paying their condo association fees, where you can get booted for not paying your parking fees. I represent residents of the place where I live, where people are booted for this every day. And I think it's ridiculous and it needs to stop. And I think that regardless of what contracts people enter into, that you should not be booted in your home. In the place where you are legally allowed to park, where you sleep at night, that should not be a place where you can be booted. It is incredibly simple to fix this in this legislation, and we already proposed it, and the answer is no booting on residential property. It's as simple as that. That's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Anything from my chairman?
Anything else before the committee? All right, now, has the committee members been notified of the committee dinner this year? Right now, tentatively, we have scheduled the committee dinners for public safety, motor vehicles. It'll be on Monday, the 5th of March. We want to get that out of the way before we get too deep into the news. Looks like we're going to a local restaurant. That's all. Your favorite. Mayor stands adjourned.
What's that bill number again, Mark? Car parking?